Hello my good friends. Today we'll take a look at the 10 new anniversary weapons that were added in the most recent update. I might create another video for the new PvE only elite skills as well, but this video will focus exclusively on the new weapons. Each class got a new weapon with a requirement on their main attribute that is customized upon acquisition. The special thing about those weapons is that they require attributes that usually don't align with that specific weapon type. Those weapons are Axe for Elementalist, Flatbow for Ritualist, Shortbow for Assassin, daggers for Paragon, hammer for Monk, scythe for Necromancer, shield for Mesmer, spear for Warrior, staff for Dervish, and sword for Ranger. You might have noticed that there are 8 martial weapons, 1 staff and 1 shield. We'll first look into the 8 martial weapons because there's one huge underlying issue that is common on all of them. To take a look at weapon damage, we'll use Assassins, since they are able to critically strike frequently. This is of benefit because critical strikes always deal the max damage from the range the weapon has, in the case of a bow that is 28. This makes it much easier to compare the actual damage. As you can see, for now I've put 8 points in critical strikes, and we will now hit this target and check for the damage number for critical hit, which can be determined by the energy gained from the critical strike's main attribute. Please note that we have not hit the weapons requirement just yet. As you can see, we just dealt a critical strike and we dealt 5 damage. Let's now go up to 9 critical strikes, which is the requirement of the bow, and check for the critical strike damage again. Fantastic. First hit, we get a 17 damage. So with this one attribute, because we now hit the weapons requirement, we deal 17 damage on a critical strike instead of 5. Now let's once again raise our critical strikes attribute to 16 by putting on these headpiece and look for a critical strike again. And as you can see, we still dealt 17 damage. Based on this, it becomes apparent that the damage does not scale at all with the weapons attribute beyond its requirement of 9. Let's read what the attribute description of marksmanship has to say about this. Marksmanship increases the damage you do with bows and your chance to inflict a critical hit when using a bow. So, we would assume that even though the bow itself has no requirement on marksmanship, that the damage will still increase if you put more points into it. Let's start with a low value of 5. Remember, we dealt 17 damage with a crit without any marksmanship investment. And now we'll strike this target. And as you can see, we just dealt 26 instead of 17. So that's a pretty huge damage gain for just 5 points in marksmanship. Once again, let's increase this value now. We'll go up to 12 marksmanship and hit this again. 48. So we're dealing 48 damage instead of 17, which is like a factor of 2.5. Let's now switch our weapon to a bow that isn't the anniversary bow, but still has the same damage range and is also customized to my character. As you can see, we just dealt 48 damage, which is the same value we dealt with the anniversary bow. This means that if we are above the requirement of the normal bow, so one that is not dependent on critical strikes as an attribute, those bows will be exactly the same damage-wise, since the critical strikes attribute does not influence the anniversary bow beyond the 9 critical strikes that are required to even deal proper damage. This means this bow is only useful when your character does indeed hit 9 critical strikes, but at the same time does not hit 9 marksmanship, because if you were to hit 9 marksmanship, you might as well use any random other bow. This also means that if you want to deal significant damage with martial weapons, with any martial weapon for that matter, and not just this bow, then you will still have to put attributes into the required weapon mastery bow of that item. Sadly, this conclusion means that situations in which the new martial anniversary weapons are superior to regular weapons are quite rare. In speed clears there are a couple niche usages, even though they don't hold up too well. For example, as tank in DOA, you'll usually be Assassin Warrior to hit your shield's attribute, which requires tactic, and therefore you'll be unable to hit the 9 marksmanship requirement of your bow. But it would be quite easy to move attributes around to hit the 9 critical strikes attribute of the anniversary bow. Sadly, and this is also a recurring theme with other classes, you will most likely be better off just using different item options. In this example with the Assassin, you could just use daggers instead, which with vampiric and double attacks deal more damage anyways. So you would only need to find a situation where you can't match an usual bow's attribute, but also where you can't use superior item options either. And those are a lot of ifs, and while these situations do exist, mostly theoretically, they are not worth any changes to what is being done currently. I will now give a couple of more examples where there might be a little value in the new weapons, and then we'll go and move along to the Dervish staff and the Mesmer shield, because these are really interesting. Now, this is for the Necromancer scythe. This is mostly a meme build, but one in where it would actually make sense to run the new weapon. Necromancer is not really played, but it's a decent example of where you have so many different attribute requirements that you would want to hit rather than your scythe mastery. So in this build you would hit Earth Prayers, and you would want to go to the max, so you'd want 12 points in Earth Prayers, and you'd also want to hit 12 points in Curses, and you would also want to hit some remaining points in Soul Reaping. So usually you would try to hit your Scythe Mastery, so you could drop like Earth Prayers and Curses and then spec into Scythe Mastery until you get like to 6, and then do the rest with Pecons, or go to, and then put a couple more points into Soul Reaping, I don't know. But in this scenario you can go full on Curses and Earth Magic, put some remainders into Soul Reaping, and then use your Pecons to go up to 10 in this case. Or you just drop 1 point in Curses, which is still better than dropping like 1 point in Curses and 1 point in Earth Prayers. So you can see, if you're really limited by your attributes and you really don't want to put attributes into your martial weapon, but need your martial weapon for build synergy reasons, in this case was Eremites, then it's an option. Ranger got the new anniversary sword, and this sounds pretty good, especially on paper. In practice not so much. In speed clears, Rangers usually have Shadow Form and Whirling Defense, run around, tank some stuff, pull stuff, whirl it alone, and in the process take quite a bit of damage. And sadly, this once again means that Rangers in speed clears usually have an Assassin secondary and will usually use daggers to deal melee damage. But well, theoretically there are situations in where you take so much damage that you wouldn't want to go on your daggers, since when you're wielding daggers you can't wield shield, and you could, in that time frame, auto attack with your sword, dealing 5 more damage than you would deal with a wintergreen sword, for example. So there's a little tiny bit upside in situations where you take so much damage that you don't want to switch off of your weapon set. Lastly, the Ritualist got a new flat bow, which is well, acceptable when you're pulling enemies, when you want to deal damage with Spirit Strength. Not so much, because then you will hit the marksmanship anyways, but I guess if you're pulling enemies and you would like to deal 10 damage instead of 2 damage, then that's a fantastic one-time usage of those. Now let's go over the others real quick. The X for Elementalist, yeah, you sometimes in speed clears as emo you'll be close to enemies and you could theoretically auto-attack them with your X, but you might also auto-attack them with your staff instead, and then you're ranged, and so there's really no big reason to run this. We've gone over the 2 bows. Paragon daggers, this is obviously terrible. Nobody plays Paragon anyways, and even if you were to play Paragon, well, there really would be no reason to run these daggers. The Monk Hammer is an actual joke, and the Spear can be quite nice. I've heard there are some usages in PvP if you really need that additional couple of damage when you're building up adrenaline as warrior or something, I don't know. But in PvE this is really not worth it. You would need to be a warrior that is attacking with his spear and has nothing better to do. That's quite rare, honestly. And we've gone over the others. So next up are staff and shield. So next up is Dervish, which is the first one where you can say that the new anniversary staff is clearly best in slot for some builds where you're not reliant on your weapons attribute for cast time reduction. So I have two staffs here. I have a Curses normal staff and I have the anniversary staff. I'm hitting the attribute of both and I'll attack this Hellhound. And I'll do 22, and I'll do 14, and I'll do 14. Fantastic. And now I'll go to the new staff, and I'll do 28, 32, 36. So I'm dealing way more damage, and it's no coincidence I picked this Hellhound, because it turns out this new staff deals holy damage. So if you're ever in the situation that you do not need a secondary attribute, and for example Dervish is sometimes, I don't know, run some curses spell or whatever, then you might as well use the anniversary staff and profit from the slightly increased auto attack damage against undead. Also, this allows you to hit your weapons attribute in general, which means that you will deal a lot more damage in general. There really is no reason not to use this weapon, unless of course you need that cast time reduction on some different attribute. Saving the best things for last. Last up is the new shield for Mesmer. This is fantastic. Mesmers will always hit their 9 fast casting, and this is not in conflict with different martial weapons. As you've heard, the issue with martial weapons is quite severe, so it's not really surprising that the two best items that were added are actually the staff for Dervish and the shield for Mesmer, since those are the two non-martial weapons. Why is this so good? Well, why would it be amazing actually? When you equip a normal shield that you don't hit the requirement of, which you as Mesmer usually don't, then you'll get just 8 armor in PvE. So this new shield, when you hit the attribute, allows you to get 8 additional armor, and 8 additional armor results in about 13% less damage taken. So this shield would be absolutely amazing. And I've heard some things from PvP players that where it is also available, by the way, that it is quite broken and imbalanced there, and makes a huge difference, obviously. Sadly, it can't be upgraded with a shield handle. So if you were to run this shield, you need to lose the plus 30 health or plus 45 while enchanted that you would usually run on your shield. Honestly, it's probably still worth it. It will be the best item in most slots. In DOA specifically, I'm not so sure, because well, it's inscribable and you can't get a plus 10 versus demons inscription. In Underworld, I think this will look way different, so it should be well, probably a contested slot there. Not sure if the minus 45 health you lose are actually worth it. But yeah, there's definitely use cases for this. The shield is pretty good. You should definitely get this one. And yeah. In conclusion, we've went over all the martial weapons. All the martial weapons are, well, due to the mechanic that you still need to invest points in the weapons attribute, are still pretty flawed. So the two items that are really worth getting are the Dervish Staff of Mysticism, deals holy damage, you can read the requirement, you will sometimes auto-attack something, and the Mesmer Shield, since there is, in a lot of situations, there's not a reason not to run it. A couple of the martial weapons are playable as well, some of the bows, the spear, the sword, and some are just actually unplayable. Overall, the decayed weapons from the 10-year anniversary are much stronger. The one difference is that the new items work outside of the event as well, and you can actually mod them. So that's one big upside. You can actually adapt these to your needs, and be better off. Overall, I think the addition of the new items is nice. A couple of people were quite disappointed, especially with how martial weapons work, but I would say it's, well, first great that we got new content. Some role players will be enabled by the new weapons, and well, we might see some use out of those, even though it might be mostly for meme builds or some ridiculous min-maxing where trying to squeeze out a couple of damage from each auto attack. But in the end, the speed climb meta will in no way be changed by this, and overall I would say it's some nice additions and give some decent additional options you might be able to consider. It definitely does no harm, and I think it's nice that we got new content.